Hey, everybody. This is Gusak, your host of the Populist Patriot. I'm doing another live stream tonight, and I recently came across some rather disturbing, if not unsurprising, statistics that polls have shown that Americans have lost trust in their institutions, whether the military, the Supreme Court, big business, and the Congress. According to the Washington Post, and this is cited in multiple publications, article dated February 16, 2022, the erosion of American trust hits the U.S. military, by Daniel W. Drazner, who's a professor of international politics at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University. He reports Pew Research saying the share of Americans who say they have a great deal of confidence in the military to act in the public's best interests has fallen 14 points from 39% in November 2020 to 25% in the current survey. Now, my question as a radical civic nationalist and as someone who loves this country, who strongly respects the institution of the military and supports the notion of a strong military, this shouldn't be in the 20s and 30s. Why is it so low? That's a problem unto itself. It should be at least 50%, 60, 70%, if not more. The Ronald Reagan Institute conducted a survey last autumn, fall of 2021, and warned, for the first time in our survey, a minority of Americans, only 45%, report having a great deal of trust and confidence in the military. Alarmingly, this is down 25 points in the last 3 years. Now we're going to look at this Gallup poll. This was a Gallup News politics section dated July 14th, 2021. Americans' confidence in major U.S. institutions dips, by Megan Brennan. Currently, an average of 33% of American adults express a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in 14 institutions. Only 33%. The U.S. Supreme Court and the criminal justice are each down 4 points since 2020 and remain below their 2019 levels. Big business and the police also saw drops in confidence. So let's see. The confidence in the public schools, well, it was at 29% in 2019, 41% in 2020, and back down to 32%. The medical system, 36% in 2019. 2020 went up to 51% and now down to 44%. Small business has actually gone up, unsurprisingly. Banks, 2019 only 30%, 2020 38%, and then in 2021 33%. The U.S. Supreme Court, 38% in 2019, 2020 it was 40%, and 36% in 2021. Technology companies, well, 2021 it was only 29%. Newspapers, not even 24%. TV news is only 16 to 18%. The presidency is under 40%. anywhere from 38 to 39%. Big business is only 18% popularity, and this last year, and Congress is at 12%. Well, why? Why? And labor unions, a little surprising. I've seen contradictory data of this, but labor unions have also are in the upper 20s in popularity, partially because really there's not a lot of heavy reporting in the mainstream media on TV, for example, about labor unions, and their pro-corporate so-called conservative media. They hate unions and launch propaganda tirades against them. But there has been creeping improvements in the image of organized labor, but not enough, clearly. I was kind of surprised by the Gallup statistics with the organized labor. But why is there this such low confidence? Most of these statistics, other than small business and the police, and in this case, the military, probably as an institution, all the other civilian institutions of the United States of America have a popularity rating of like well under 50%. We're talking about from the teens to barely 40%. Why? Because these institutions are no longer serving the welfare of the American people. People see that big business is shipping their jobs overseas and squeezing the workforce for more work for less pay and less benefits. And that's been an ongoing problem for decades. We see that Congress is unrepresentative, that they're basically the arm of the ruling plutocracy, the private sector oligarchs. We see that the Supreme Court, now I don't like abortion, but the justices that are so-called conservative, like Clarence Thomas, they're all members or somehow or another involved in the Federalist Society, which is nothing but the legal front for corporate America, whether it's woke corporations like Apple or Google or others who've all given money to the Federalist Society. And just because you're a woke corporation doesn't mean you really are sincere about social liberalism like pro-LGBTQ causes. They just make money from it, and they do what's popular and what's best for their bottom line, irrespective of whether it harms society or harms people as individuals or a national security or not. And the Supreme Court, the so-called conservative majority, they're the handmaidens for corporate America, and they hide under constitutionalism and originalism and limited government and all the rest of it. I mean, this is the same so-called conservative court that has claimed through the Citizens United, as well as previous cases, as well as the McCutcheon case, that big corporate money in politics is basically free speech, that it doesn't contain the smell of corruption. So it's no small wonder the court is unpopular. And now with the abortion decision, we have an anti-natal, anti-family economic policy of trickle-down economics. And at the same time, women are being told, well, you got to have children, regardless. And somehow or another, you're going to have to bring them in the world and raise them in an anti-natal environment. And I make this challenge to the so-called pro-life crowd. If you're truly pro-life, you need to get rid of the idea of free market fundamentalism, which is anti-natal, which supports the concept of laborers and families and individuals as disposable commodities, to extract as much labor from them as possible with little compensation as possible. And you can't have a pro-life movement and marry that to trickle-down reactionary free market economics of deregulation of free trade, of the destruction of unions under the guise of worker freedom, and opening the borders to various foreign visa workers, as well as undocumented immigrants to be ruthlessly exploited. and the destruction of the productive public sector. We take a look at the military. Now, this program supports the concept of a very strong military, capable of defending our borders and perhaps certain strategic choke points throughout the world that directly do affect the United States, as well as also a very strong civil defense network that protects our people as an entirety, not just the wealthy people who are buying up shelters in abandoned missile silos that are converted to bunkers. No, I support civil defense and the protection of the population of all classes and races. And that should be the job of the government, the federal government, and the Department of Defense, and not the private sector. In fact, one of the things that aggravates people is the privatization of military functions. It's not to say that private companies shouldn't be producing weapons and competing to produce the best weapons and services and whatnot, but we have to take a look at the corruption inherent in privatization and the revolving doors between defense contractors and also military officer corps. There has to be that firewall. You retire from the military, you cannot work for a private company that is directly or indirectly related to military procurement. You can't lobby them, you can't work for them. Period, the end. And we also need to restore people like Sheh Assad and others that were fired by Trump, Mr. Drain the Swamp, who can really pressure defense companies to tamp down their costs, where the federal government and the military negotiate with these defense companies and lower their excessive prices. They're asking for military weapons and services associated with running a military and supplying a military. And you see these long drawn out wars in Iraq, in Afghanistan, Syria to some degree, which thankfully really didn't get underway. And you see a lot of life and treasure being expended in these long drawn out wars where, yes, we overthrew the Taliban in 2001 and we overthrew the Arab Baath socialist dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, fine. But did we really achieve victory? And it turned out to be a long exercise in corrupt nation building. And now Iraq, the successive Iraqi governments have tilted towards Iran, and Afghanistan is now back in the hands of the Taliban. So at the end of the day, at what cost? Why did we expend so much American lives of Afghans and innocent Iraqis that were non-combatants, as well as expending trillions of dollars? I mean, literally trillions of dollars have been spent in our commitments to Afghanistan and Iraq. So people translate all these issues with our military interventionism and military procurement corruption issues with distrust in the U.S. military. When it comes to the average soldiers, male or female, your patriotic elements of the officer class in the military, the ones who are in it really for idealistic reasons, I have nothing but the strongest support. I've met many of the finest human beings who have served in the American military, and frankly also in the police, that believe in strong bonds with the community and respecting the people, while also upholding the law in a very firm way. Big business, I mean, that's no surprise. Public schools. Well, what's going on with the public schools is the result not really of the unions, particularly in the right to work states. Take Florida. The public schools, I mean, teachers are fleeing the profession by the thousands in this state, as well as other states, particularly ones that are, quote, red Republican states. Why? Because the teachers are treated like crap. They're paid like crap. The benefits are not always necessarily good. For what a good teacher has to put up with in the classroom, I mean, despite the classroom size amendments in the state of Florida, I mean, teachers have like 20 to 30 something kids. That's a lot to manage, one person. You can have as much behavioral management strategies thrown at you, and that is a task that really the teachers are not paid enough to deal with. And the kids, not that I'm blaming the kids, but they're bringing all their pathologies and issues from their home life into the classroom, and the teachers are expected to basically serve as en parentis lucus, I think is the Latin term, in serving basically as the parents in lieu of the actual natural parents. And that's wrong. That's wrong. So people identify these issues occurring in the public schools, the high stakes testings, and all the rest of it that are deeply unpopular with Americans, particularly even in the state of Florida, with the public school system, which really, in reality, the public schools are basically the victims of bad state, sometimes local, and federal government policy. So this is what's going on here. And in previous live streams, I say this over and over and over again. It's statistics like this is the reason why we need to have a government based on radical civic nationalist principles. This is another penny in the jar, folks. Another penny in the jar of why we need radical civic nationalism to be implemented in this country as a matter of public policy as well as governing philosophy. We should not be having institutions, for the most part, polling at under 40%. We have to do better than this, ladies and gentlemen in the audience. We must do better in order to survive as a nation. So I want to thank you all for joining me for this live stream. And I think I got about maybe 2 or 3 more coming up. Stay tuned.